Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lauren Hudak, and I am the Special Projects Officer in the Office of the Vice Provost, Innovations and Undergraduate Education. We would like to sincerely thank you for joining us today to learn more about research-intensive courses and the innovative ways that divisions are responding to the conversion of these experiences to remote delivery. Before we begin, I wish to acknowledge this land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit River. Today, this meeting place is still home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. As you can see on this slide, we have a number of other exciting sessions over the course of the next 2 weeks. Please view our SharePoint site, which is available to all University of Toronto faculty and staff, to learn more about the other sessions and for registration information. If you missed some of the earlier sessions, you are also encouraged to view the SharePoint site to watch the session recordings and to browse through the available resources and materials. Links to this information will be provided to you by email today after the session. To ensure that we have as much time as possible, I would now like to turn this virtual floor over to my colleague, Lori Harrison.
Hello, everyone. I'm Lori Harrison. I'm the Director of Online Learning Strategies at the University of Toronto, and I'm going to be a session facilitator today. I see people rolling in. I can see them joining the session. Some are still coming in. Some names familiar to me, some new folks to me, but we're glad that you've joined us today. And we're very fortunate to have two great session speakers. They're both faculty that I've worked with before, and so it's been great to reconnect, and I'm very excited about having them share their experiences with you today. We have Professor Don Kilkenny from the Institute of Biomedical Engineering and Engineering, and also Shafiq Virani, who's an associate professor at the Department of Historical Studies at UTM. So our game plan for today is for a short introduction that I'll provide, and then our panelists will share their experiences about research, experiential learning in the research context. And then importantly, we're going to have a round table, which will give you a chance to ask questions, and we'll be able to address your unique needs. I'm going to turn off my video now just to try and improve my audio and make sure my audio quality is good. We will have the chat running, so you can also post your thoughts and comments in the chat as we go, but we'll hold most major discussion, aside from sort of quick clarification, we'll hold the major discussion until after our presenters have a chance to share. So moving forward, I first wanted to just set the context. Experiential learning has been very high on the list of priorities at the university over the past 2 or 3 years. A lot of the focus has been on workplace learning, but if you go back to the U of T framework that was established a few years ago, when everything seemed to burst on the scene, U of T identified a number of broad categories. So workplace learning is, of course, well known to us. Community partnerships is also, we've had a group working in that area. And international is on the rise as well, Global Classroom Initiative, so you've probably heard about that. But we just want to acknowledge that research is equally important, and at U of T especially, we want to ensure that our students have the opportunity for experiential learning in the research domain as well. So that could be applied research. There have been some curricular initiatives, the Science to Society program, a minor specialization, and other types. Today we're going to hear primarily about opportunities for undergraduate students, potentially graduate students as well. And our focus will show us some examples and also some related strategies. So just before we get started with that, we wanted to do a little bit of a poll to see who's in the room, who's joined us in our virtual webinar room today. So I'm going to ask you to use the chat tool to do a quick poll. Now the chat tool is available to you if you click on the purple button in the lower right and pop it out. There's something that looks like a balloon, that's the chat. And in the box at the bottom, I'm going to ask you to just say a few words about why you're here today. Is there a course component, a particular initiative? That's the reason why you're here. So let's see what folks are up to. Jennifer says she's running a research opportunities program next year. Let's wait for a moment. Some more ROP, so that's a couple of folks on that category. Professional experience course, online teaching support. Rennie wants to know all she can. Student-centered assignments, history of English language, lots of ROP, service learning, First Nation, more ROP from Tim. That's great. Ethnographic methods courses. Okay, so a lot of course related. I think that those of you in the ROP category are going to really appreciate what we'll hear about today. Perfect. Okay, let's move on. So what we heard from you when we asked you your questions in the registration form fell into a few broad themes. Some of you were looking for high-level research experience design strategies, so we'll hear 2 of those today from our guest speakers. And in the process, they'll also give you some examples of active learning engagement strategies that they've been using. We'll have some practical examples as well. But then beyond that, really deeper dive into the how-tos and the technical. We're going to leave that for today. We'll provide you with some references and resources at the end of the session that will give you the technical details. So just to set a bit further context, I pulled up a white paper that was developed when experiential learning first burst on the scene, and it was authored by some of the leading thinkers in the university community on the topic of experiential learning, and they had a section on criteria for quality. So I looked through that and I pulled out 3 of the criteria that I felt had particular relevance for the experiential learning in the research domain that I thought would help us to set the stage for today. The 3 that I selected that I think you will find reflected in the descriptions of activities that our presenters will share with you include authenticity. So holding in our minds the importance of having meaningful, appropriate to the students' abilities, but still offering them autonomy and high levels of responsibility for their own work in self-directed manner where possible. A second one, learning support, ensuring that we have orientation, mentorship, training opportunities so that they don't feel lost, so that they're supported in their journey with scaffolded activities. And thirdly, that we are quite intentional in our design, that we ground it in theory and appropriate assessment, so we have alignment between our learning outcomes, our activities, and our assessments. And again, we'll hear a bit more about that from presenters today. So we'll hold those objectives or those criteria for quality in our mind. And finally, I wanted to share a few themes that came out as we were discussing the presentation, we were planning for today, and we were talking about what was important and what we would need to foreground. And a few key strategies emerged that are important for student motivation. Those of you who've worked in the ROP context will know that first getting engaged and excited, but then maintaining their interest and keeping the momentum up through to completion and having the outputs that we're looking for at the end of the project or the course is part of the challenge. So some of the things that we will be exploring today include social presence. So if we have synchronous interactions in particular, they can really help foster the connection between students, mentors, and other researchers where possible. Communication of clear objectives and task structure was another theme area, being very intentional, sequencing the structure, varying between independent and collaborative work was a recommendation that emerged. And finally, creating common spaces for sharing. Students are very enthusiastic when they can see outputs, and those outputs are available, shared either publicly or within the class, and thinking about what strategies we can use to have them have a high level of satisfaction. For example, portfolios or other methods. So those are a few high-level strategies that we wanted to share with you, but I think we'll get to the good stuff now, and I am going to move forward and turn the virtual mic over to Dawn. So I'm going to invite Dawn now to share with us some of her experiences and insights. So Dawn, I'll let you take over the driver's seat.
Great. Thank you very much, Lori. Good afternoon to everyone, and thank you for joining us this afternoon. I appreciate this opportunity because what I've set out to share with you is a pilot summer program that we have put together in the Faculty of Engineering to support undergraduate research. And this meeting today has really been a great opportunity for me to reflect back and see what we've done that has been working and maybe where there are some areas of challenge. So at the direction of the Dean of Engineering, I took over the task of creating an undergraduate summer research program, which we call the USERT program. And this is a remote learning opportunity exclusively for undergraduate students who have elected to engage in summer research projects within the faculty. And that means they're working with any engineering faculty member. It doesn't matter if the students are from U of T or not, we welcome everyone, but their work is centered there. And the three major objectives that we identified at the beginning of the summer, and it's very much like you would set out with a course, is that we wanted to support the students in their research experiences, particularly because everything has pivoted to being remote. We wanted to, again, ensure that their experience is meaningful. And in addition, we wanted to create a very enriched community of undergraduate students that normally would not know and or interact with one another because they come to us from every discipline across the faculty. And, you know, research, as we understand, is much more than just the research theory and the research skill. There are a lot of other pieces, spokes to the wheel that will make our undergrad students successful. And these include things such as communication, leadership, teamwork, responsible conduct. So drawing from this, our specific learning outcomes are severalfold. First of all, we do want to make sure we discuss the relevant practices so that these students ensure that their research experience is successful. We want to help them develop skills outside of what we would be able to do on campus or in a research lab, and that means their ability to access relevant resources. We have strong ability to help them engage in research dissemination. We also like to have them practice assessment. Normally in person we would do peer assessment. Here we can still find ways to do that remotely. And again, this creation of community. Community is a word that I love to use with my undergrad students, and I want them to understand how much they can support each other and what they can get out of that. So I'll briefly describe the logistics of the program. To share with you. So it's the duration of the summer. We began in mid-May and we'll run through mid-August. This, I think, we will be able to then translate this to a course moving forward if we find appropriate success. And we are averaging 1 or 2 sessions a week. There are 14 sessions in total. The benefit to the University of Toronto students is that if they complete at least 10 of those sessions, they are eligible for CCR validation. Okay, we do use the Quirkus, the Blackboard Collaborate format. We found that it has been relatively successful thus far, and there's lots of nice tools within that you can engage your students and have smaller groups. And we are supported by the Office of the Dean, and I was fortunate to acquire one graduate student that has been very nice, not only in helping deliver the sessions each week, but also in sort of being that moderator between the student perspective and my perspective, given that he's sort of in between in the graduate portfolio. So I share with you a few of our metrics. This was not a strongly advertised program, given that it's a pilot. I was a little hesitant to blow the horn too much. And so we advertised with the undergraduate administrators within each discipline. As of today, we have 61 students registered, and you can see in the chart here on the on the left, the lower left, that there is a distribution across not only engineering disciplines, but we do have a couple students from medical science, from molecular genetics, political science, that have actually found research projects and faculty within engineering to support those projects. So each week, these students are engaged through Blackboard, but we also get the odd drop-in. There are other undergrad students that may not be registered in the program but are interested, and we do share a guest link with those students. Again, we're welcome to anyone who wants to join. Now, the little chart to the right also shows you we have a pretty even distribution across the student base as to where they are in their program of study. And, you know, there is a bit of a dip in third year, but I attribute that to, in the engineering program, a lot of the students leave after third year and go do an internship. This year, a lot of them are doing virtual internships, but I think that leaves us with a smaller base in terms of those students that do engage in research. Okay, and I know this is probably one of the more interesting slides for most of you that are entertaining how to support undergraduate research. So our faculty have been fairly robust and fairly engaged in creating experiences that can be done remotely. So to the left, I show you a kind of the range of different project topics that some of our students are working on, everything from, you know, true biology, a Drosophila embryo wound healing, to something that's more mechanical, electrical, with landing of drones, to the education space. So very diverse. And you know, if we were to support them at the ground level, it would be very challenging because of the diversity. So the way the program is built is that we support their research experience. Okay, and when I polled the different actual faculty members to find out how they had created these experiences online, I've listed here the most common experiences that have been shared. So first and foremost, a lot of projects have been built around reviews of the literature, analysis of data that has previously been acquired in the lab by grad students or postdocs before COVID shut down, a lot of development of software and databases, but interesting also interviews and focus groups. And the majority of these advisors and students are doing communication through Teams, through Zoom, and through Slack. These are what people have found have been very successful in terms of creating that lab dynamic. Now, the curriculum that we have created and we support the students with can be broken down into several different categories. So I've termed them evaluation, research fundamental, dissemination, and career focus. So all those other pieces of the wheel that I showed you earlier on that we feel will help these students really garner a robust research experience, something beyond just the research skills. So everything from self-evaluation to evaluating their peers' work, to the safety training and ethics training, career focus. We are doing it at multi-level, both at the graduate student level, but also engaging engineering alumni through career talks. And then dissemination is, of course, a big focus. We want these students to have this meaningful experience where we ensure that the work they are doing will be a product at the end, and that they will actually do a scientific presentation. And I've been very fortunate, early communication when COVID first hit campus and things were shutting down, to partner with other initiatives and people who were in the same boat and were looking to somehow turn their program into something remote as well. So, you know, a great example is the Troost iLead field program is normally a program that undergrad engineers can join, and they go out in the community. So for an example, to the Rogers Center, and they have a session out there where they talk about the impact and the design and all the engineering pieces. Clearly not an option for them this year. They are the ones who are leading the career talks, and we have partnered with them so that my USERP students can take advantage of this network of alumni. Okay, and we've also partnered with a couple of student-led initiatives, an educational program out of biomedical engineering that reaches to the community, to high school students, as well as the students that lead the undergraduate engineering research day. I'm not sure if I have a pointer going here, the planning committee. And this will be the final event that all of our undergrad researchers will participate in, a virtual symposium where they will be judged and will have opportunity to interact with graduate student judges and faculty members. So just a little bit more about that. Again, this is an engineering undergrad student initiative where they build all pieces of the final research day. Undergrad students that indicate participation are responsible to prepare and submit an abstract of their work. The UNER team will evaluate and provide feedback on those abstracts, and undergrad students will be assigned either oral or poster presentations depending on preference and or the schedule of the research day. They will be responsible to create their final presentation in either format. And before they actually participate in that final day, they will have opportunity to do practice presentations, and that will be to an audience of the incoming engineering class. So those students that have now just accepted a place in the engineering program for the fall, and they will be brought on board as the audience. And the way that this committee is running this virtual symposium, there will be a scheduled date of August 14th at 9 to 12. The oral presentations are being run using Zoom with breakout rooms where judges will be assigned. And the poster presentations, interestingly, will be done through either Twitter or LinkedIn. And within engineering, we had a graduate research day back in June that graduate students created and ran. And it was the first time I personally had seen posters being presented through the Twitter platform. So now, based on the success of that initiative, our undergrad UNER committee is moving forward to do something similar with the undergraduate symposium. Okay, so we have obviously had a lot of challenges. Motivation of students to participate is strong. You know, if they're not surrounded by their lab mates or their lab members, this ability to get online can pose challenges. We also find, because of the diversity of year of study, a lot of the third and fourth year students may have already seen some of these supporting pieces within classes or capstone courses, and therefore they are less willing to participate now. They believe it may be a repetition. Okay. When we do a program like this in engineering in person, we also add in practical lab skills. We open up our teaching facilities and allow our undergrad summer researchers to come in and learn other research skills, hands-on things that they maybe can't learn effectively in their lab or maybe outside the purview of their lab. And that's not an option this year. One alternative is to provide access to online videos or online simulations. But there's varied success into student interest in doing that as well. Clearly, creating a community connection is different, and the students themselves have indicated challenges with connecting to lab mates. They feel somewhat isolated, and they feel that perhaps they don't have full comprehension of the expectations of their supervisors, and that's a challenge to get these students through that. And again, facilitating that mentorship, which is not always in real time. So the students may do a piece of their project and then have to wait to get feedback. And you know, mentorship and support is very important, particularly to those undergrads who are just doing research for the first time. From the supervisor perception, of all the faculty members that I polled, and I believe there was something like 30 or 25 or 30 of them, only one indicated that it was a problem this summer and they felt it was not worth anyone's time. The remaining supervisors were all very positive and felt that the modifications that they had made with the students to go remote were working well. And I did select a few quotes just to highlight, you know, beyond transferring well, individuals are taking advantage of this extra time, you know, to devote to developing skills online and in databases and so forth that maybe you don't prioritize when you're actually in the lab. Another faculty member actually felt the productivity of their students was higher because they were more focused and there was less distraction. And another group who their work is based with a lot of research interviews and focus groups felt that they were actually more efficient because having to do these interviews remotely, they were able to use the built-in functionality of recording, and that actually expedited their process. Okay, so I'm happy to delve into any more of the specifics of sort of the scaffold of the program that, again, we are piloting this summer. But, you know, I think as of today, I can make some recommendations that if you do carefully scaffold, the research experience for undergrad students can still be very impactful. And I think if you were to poll our engineering students, you would find a high degree of success. But again, we do have to keep our expectations realistic. Not every research project can effectively be translated to a remote environment. Okay, but that said, don't be afraid to integrate additional resources. Don't be afraid to try putting those training videos or those simulations into the toolbox that your students are using. Okay, and lastly, you must be very conscientious to consistently provide support to those students. Keep checking in on them because there's no guarantee that they're getting appropriate support from their actual research advisor. We see a wide array of students feeling that they are part of their lab group. So, you know, we do weekly reminders and check-ins. We facilitate discussion boards, although I will say they're not being used as effectively as I thought they would be. And every session, I make sure to include polls, such as the one we've had earlier today, to really get that real-time feedback on what the student needs are. What are they interested in hearing? What would they like my help with, or, you know, the help of our undergrad research community? So I think I will end here, and I thank you, and I will greatly appreciate any questions or any comments or recommendations that any of you have based on the things that you're trying to do within your own faculties and divisions. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Dawn. That was a great presentation. It's pretty quiet in the chat. I think we're just all in awe of, of this great program that you developed. There's so much there, and there are a lot of subcomponents of your program that I'm sure are useful to people that they might be able to parse out and think about how they might use those strategies in their own context. I'll just ask if there's any questions for clarification right now. We'll do a little deeper dive on discussion a little bit further down in the round table. But it sounds really amazing, and we'll keep that in our mind as we switch gears now. If you have questions, you can still come back to it later on, as Dawn mentioned, to ask her about more details. But right now we're going to switch over and we're going to have a presentation from Shavik. Now, this is going to be a totally different discipline area. So if you've been wondering if it's all about science, not today. We're going to get a really great example from the Department of Historical Studies, his work using group activities in an ROP context. So I'll turn it over to Shavik now to share with us his experiences.
Thanks very much, Lori. It's great to see you again, and also to have all these wonderful people on board today. I'm looking forward to learning as much from the audience as they learn from us. I really appreciated towards the end of Dawn's slides where she told us about the feedback from the various professors who were involved with instructing the research course. And I think that's where I'd like to take off, is that this is actually a wonderful method of delivery. My experience with online teaching in research actually far predates COVID-19. And I found that both in person as well as online have their own advantages and are really great methods of involving students in this. When I was first hired at U of T about 10 years ago, I was overseas at the time, and the chair of my new department of historical studies had sent me a message and saying, well, you'll be teaching these courses when you come in. And by the way, we have something called the Research Opportunity Program, which allows an undergraduate student to work with you and to gain some experience with researching. And I know it's very early and that you're just starting out, but is it something that you'd like to try? And I thought about it, and the first thought that entered my mind was, oh my goodness, I'm going to be so busy just starting out at a new university. What's it going to be like, taking on these extra responsibilities? But then I thought to myself that when I was an undergraduate student, never once in the 4 years that I had did I ever learn anything about the research of any of my professors. And that was very sad, because you have some of the most interesting people you would ever meet who are doing some of the most cutting edge discoveries that we'd ever find, yet we never knew anything about that. And I thought, this is exactly what I would have loved to have been involved with as a student. And that's where I started out. And I had one student. And after that was one of the most wonderful experiences I had. And that student went and told all their friends. And the following year, there were many, many more people who came back and said they'd like to participate. And gradually, this group grew and grew and grew, so that there were about 14 or 15 students. And it was wonderful. I enjoyed it more than almost anything else I was doing at the university. But at the same time, it was just many. I just could not figure out how do we go and work with all of these sorts of students. But I didn't want to let it go. And one of the reasons for that is that if any of you have worked with the ROP program before, with Sue, Romulo, and Michael Letieri, they have this amazing, amazing team. And I've, if for nothing else, just to work with these people. They really make it a fantastic experience. And I know at the beginning that there were many people who were involved with this webinar because of the fact that they're working with the ROP program. And so I would say this is going to be one of the most wonderful experiences you'll have at U of T. The challenge that I had was simply demand. There were not that many in the professors giving research opportunity program courses in the humanities, and I think that students in the humanities were really flocking towards that. So it was a capacity issue. And if we look at the, I'm sure all of you are familiar with NSSE, the National Survey of Student Engagement, and it regularly says that among the best experiences that students have going through the programs is participating in research with a professor. So it was not something that I wanted to let go of. Fortunately, shortly after I started that, U of T really went in big with online education, and that's where I first met Lori. The Center for Teaching Support and Innovation had a course design institute in May 2012, and I applied for that and put forward the idea of seeing if we could design a research experience for large groups of students in the humanities, which was something rather difficult because we have divergent learning in the humanities, where you expect students to come to different solutions for the same problem. Whereas in the sciences, we often have convergent learning, where you essentially, students, if you give them a mathematics problem, you're hoping that they're going to end up with the same result because that would be the right result. In the humanities, it's a very, very different kettle of fish. And so I went into that, and actually here's a photograph from way back then. You'll see Lori there in the background. That's her 10 years ago. And we had these incredible sets where U of T was getting its first experience in this area. And it was revolutionary for me. I had been teaching for many years already. I had taught at Harvard, I taught in the Middle East, and I was teaching now at U of T. But I'd never had quite this sort of experience. And they introduced us to many, many different theoreticians, many practical ideas about how to run this. One of the people that they introduced us to was Grant Wiggins, and I really enjoyed his book, Understanding by Design, which made me rethink how I thought through how to offer courses, particularly in research and particularly online. And one of the things that I liked about what we were taught was that he had what they called a backward design process. And what that essentially meant is that you start at the end. In other words, you sort of think to yourself, what do I want students to have at the end of my course? What research skills should these students possess when they finish my research opportunity program course or any other course that they happen to be involved in? The second thing that you have to think through is that well, how do I check that they have learned what I think that they've learned? In other words, assessment. What sort of assessments do we need to make sure that they're learning what we want them to learn? And then the third thing is, now, what activities do I need to create? What learning opportunities do I need to create in order to get us to that final goal, in order so that they can succeed in those assessments? And that really revolutionized the way that I thought about this. One other thing that struck me very strongly at that time was something I had learned separately from this. Just by a show of virtual hands, how many of you are familiar with TED Talks? I see half the audience, their hands are going up. Anybody heard of one of the most famous TED Talks by Susan Cain, which is called The Power of Introverts? Few hands going up. If you haven't had a chance to see this talk, I urge you, go on the TED website and watch Susan Cain's talk called The Power of Introverts. I remember listening to that talk for the first time, and she just experiences that I think are very similar to those of many of us as academics. We tend to have an introverted side to us. And she talks about an experience she had as a child of age 9. And she went to a summer camp. And she assumed that summer camp was going to be like the social time she had with her family, and there would be 10 young girls in their jammies getting together at night and reading books and then giggling and laughing about the books that they were reading. And it was something completely different. And she talked about how being an introvert was, they were almost taught that it was wrong. It was wrong to be, to be reading. They had to interact all the time. And that really struck me, because I know that for myself, like for Susan Cain, I do a lot of my best work sitting and thinking by myself with my books. And I know the same is true for many of you. Regardless of what field we're in, academics, we do a lot of our thinking as introverts and a lot of our best work working by ourselves. That doesn't mean that we don't collaborate. We have that aspect as well. There's nobody who's exclusively an introvert or an extrovert. But what I find in academia is this push towards making everybody an extrovert. And I see that, for example, in the Tri-Council funding, where research projects that involve extrovert types of activities being premiated. I myself have been involved in some of these multi-million-dollar collaboration grants and so on. And so I do see the value of that. I'd love to see more in the way of isolation grants. Grants that allow us to think and work by ourselves and to do our best research. And so I thought that even in designing courses, it needed to have both of those aspects, both the aspect that serves research as individuals, the type of introverted research that many of us do, but as well as taking advantage of what research and collaboration means. The other thing that I thought to myself was that in the humanities in particular, one of the most effective methods of imparting knowledge and sharing knowledge is through stories. And so I thought through, what sort of a story could this course revolve around? And to me, research was an adventure. It was really something where you are out on a voyage of discovery. And so I decided to structure the course around the theme of a voyage of discovery. And it enters everywhere into the course, whether that be in you can see over here the sort of slides that I use, the PowerPoint slides, where you have the maps in the background. The website for the course has very similar themes. Everything that we do in the course, whether it's the course outline, the exam that we give, the narratives that are provided, they all revolve around this theme of an adventure. And over here in the course, in the descriptions over here, you can see we have the course map. We have explorer profiles, which is every single person in the course gets their own profile. Researchers belong to different guilds. So students, depending on the skills that they bring with them, belong to a different guild with other students who share those sorts of interests. We have a series of modules in which they have exposure to information literacy. And we call that navigating your travels. Essentially, they learn about all the various tools that they'll be needing as they go on this voyage of discovery. Every week, they submit with weekly logs, as they would if they were going on a voyage. And then we have other things where they all come involved, get in collaboration with each other in a forum called the Delhi Darbar. And so everything in the course centers around this story. And what I find is that students really get into it. Rather than having a research journal, which many courses have, we call it a travel log. And every student, when writing their travel log, has an opportunity to tell their story. Where are they in their voyage? And students really get into it. For example, right now in this particular term, over the summer, I have a couple of students who write poetry every week in their travel log, telling about their journeys. And the other students love it. They jump into those travel logs to read that student's poetry every week and give them feedback. And sometimes they write their responses in poetry. And some of them, they write things like, I navigated dangerous shoals today as I tried to understand such and such a text. And so they do get into that sort of thing. Even the plagiarism statement, all of us in our course outline, we have to include plagiarism statements, which you really never read because they're the same mundane sort of thing. It's sort of like whenever you sign up for something online and you get those agreements that you have to read and agree to. How many of us ever read those? Our course outlines are often so templated and so boilerplate that students never bother to read the important information. And so even when discussing plagiarism, which is important, it is important to have template language, I talk about it in terms of Marco Polo, who was, as most of you would know, an adventurer. But he was also known as Marco of a Million Lies. Why? Because it seems that a lot of the information he provided was not things that he had discovered himself. For example, when he went to China, for some reason he never mentioned the fact that people eat with chopsticks. And it made others very suspicious as to whether he wrote everything in his travel logs by himself. And so when they read this, when students read this, they really take it seriously. And so, it's something that draws them into the narrative. So that's a little bit about the research travelogue. Over here, you'll see that even the images sort of lead them into the theme of the whole group. And then we have something collaborative group, which is called the Cairo Cafe. And the Cairo Cafe is essentially a forum where they can discuss with each other and collaborate. And I've had more people participate in this session than in any of my in-class sessions whenever we've had discussion groups. Just coming towards the end, I think that an example of how this has really sparked student interaction is that I can give you an example in the Cairo Cafe. Two of my students met one another, and I asked them if I could use their names. One was Mijgan and one was Saad. And there was so much interaction in the Cairo Cafe. The two of them ended up getting married. And the theme of their wedding was the Cairo Cafe. And they showed photographs at their wedding of our group and their first meeting online with the rest of the members of their class. And so it really does create a lot of wonderful experiences for students. I had a very similar experience with a student the following year. Her name was Rida, and her group became so close to one another that she got married the following year in Pakistan, and her entire group from the Cairo Cafe traveled to Pakistan to go to her wedding. So it's not that because you're online rather than in class, that we can't create experiences that really change the lives of our students. We can do it online, we can do it in class, and so don't think of this as just something that students have because we're in COVID-19 situation. It's something that can be really a wonderful experience for students. Just a couple of weeks ago, I had a student write this in their travel log, and I'll end with this. Today was my first day as a part of the Dream Team. I've spent a lot of time carefully examining all the provided instructions and completed the driver's quiz. I enjoyed the narrative style of the instructions. It was the first course outline where I actually carefully read the parts of the syllabus that I usually skip in all other outlines, since they're always the same copied and pasted text. From the Cairo Cafe instructions, I found out that in Ukrainian, my second native language after Russian, the coffee sounds exactly the same as in Arabic. I couldn't wait to begin doing the actual translation work, so I began as soon as I could. I managed to complete a draft of the translation of the first paragraph. It was a good, productive day. And so with that, I will turn it over to all of you.
Great. Thank you so much, Shafiq. And Shafiq is a true storyteller. Listening to him when he presents, it's also the same narrative approach that he uses with his students, which is he's demonstrating and modeling for us today. So for those of you who want to get a little bit of a different approach, Shafiq's certainly a fine example of someone who takes a lot of the traditional lecturing and course design traditions that we have and turns them on their head. We had one question and several people chiming in about the ROP poster forum that Dawn was talking about. And I think that talking a bit around how we have students share their work and present that back might be a good topic for the roundtable. So maybe we'll start with Dawn. Perhaps she can describe a little bit more about that roundtable. And Shafiq, maybe we'll come back to you on how your students share their work. So Dawn, do you want to talk a bit about the poster forum Twitter idea?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. First and foremost, I want to say I think I want to take Shafiq's course. I really enjoyed that.
I want to take yours, Dawn.
Anytime. So with regards to the poster session that we are planning to host, we can certainly share the Twitter link that of the graduate research conference that we are actually going to model the undergrad symposium after. But like any poster, the students are given a defined size and they have to create a summary of their research experience within that space. Those files, and there is some liberty, and they're very modern style posters, everything from a static image to GIFs. We saw some posters that had a little bit of dynamic movement in them, to things that moved around. The graduate students were responsible to submit these online. They were on Twitter. There was a defined time that they had to be available online, and judges that had been assigned were expected to go online and see those posters. The students, therefore, being available at that time if they wanted to have an interaction. In addition, the organizers made sure that there were Slack channels available so that the student and judge could also communicate in real time through Slack as a way of presenting and doing the Q&A and assessing. I do know so far that the feedback I heard, the Slack channels were not effective. But again, this has only been done once in one group. I'm not sure that we will be using that piece with the undergrad, but any student that wants to do a poster, they will have to submit their file in advance. It will be posted online, and again, there will be defined times for the presenters to interact with audience members and or judges. So I did share the link with Lauren. I think she can probably put that somewhere, but I'm more than happy to put that in the chat as well. And if you scroll down on their Twitter page, you will see a couple different examples of winning posters. So static posters versus the GIF. Some of them are quite eye-catching.
Perhaps you can go ahead and put that link direct in the chat, Dawn. I think,
yeah,
there it is. That looks great. Super.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thanks for a little bit more detail on that. Shafiq, do you want to talk a bit about how your students share their work?
Sure, certainly. So in addition to the Cairo Cafe, we have mini conferences, and we structure them very much like an academic conference, where a group of students gathers online, they show their posters, and they discuss what they're doing. And it's more like a series of workshops where they're using it to get feedback. and to get ideas from their colleagues. So not at all unlike what Dawn and her team are doing.
Laura, you're on mute.
Thank you. If there are more questions, you can pop those in the chat if you have questions building on that, or put up your hand if you'd like to, if you're an extrovert and you'd like to share your question. And I will also just take a, while you're thinking about that, we can also refer to some of the questions that we had that you submitted with the registration form. So one of the questions we had was project management software. One person asked how to keep student research teams on track and what tools could be used. So Dawn or Shafiq, maybe Dawn, do you want to comment on that first?
Yeah, so as a supporting program, the strategy that I'm using, and I didn't really highlight it in my presentation, is that the very first week we talked about individual research plans, and the students are responsible for setting that out at the beginning of the summer. And then at periodic intervals, we revisit that. When we connect on Friday mornings, I will follow up and say, what have you achieved on your research plan? What have you changed? Are you meeting your goals? So it's not software per se, but it is a mechanism to try to keep them on track.
Thanks. Shafiq, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes, so we do something very similar. I had tried a few years back to use project management software, and it didn't work well for us. I think primarily because the students were working with so many pieces of software. We used OneDrive, Quarkus had just come in at that time, and so the students found it a bit overwhelming trying to learn the various different types of software. What I found the following year was that I was able to shift. We do something very similar using simply an Excel spreadsheet on OneDrive, in which we've created columns where they set weekly goals, and they try to meet those goals, and we give them feedback every week. And so we're able to do something very similar, but not necessarily with software that's unfamiliar to them. So I would say that if you want to do something like that, it's a great idea, but try to keep it as simple as possible.
I think that's great advice. Thanks, Shafiq. There's a question that's been posted in the chat from Christine, and she's noting that ROP students look forward to developing a mentoring relationship with faculty or possibly get reference letters, and wonders if an ROP that's online hinders the mentorship relationship. Do we have any thoughts on that?
My experience has been, I write about 40 letters of recommendation every year. And so it's definitely, you're right, it's one of the things that is very wonderful about the ROP program is simply the close relationships that you form with students. We do lose something and we gain something. What we lose is that face-to-face interaction is a little bit more difficult, even though we do have technology that allows for that. And I try to make sure that I do meet with the students online, face-to-face. But you're right, it's not quite the same thing, right? And so there are things gained. You can have a larger number of students. The students can interact more with one another. At the same time, there is a little bit lost as well. So, so yeah, I won't deny that at all.
I think those are trade-offs.
And I would agree. One thing that I'm very hopeful of with our program this summer is that because it's a diverse group of students, everything from year 1 through year 4, when we keep putting them in breakout groups, we try to have a range. And so they kind of form mentorships with the upper year students mentoring the first years. And you know, we're having them engage with graduate student panels to try and form some connections that way. You know, and when they do their practice presentations, they will actually become the mentors for the incoming engineering students who are really still high school students. So we're trying to show them and make them responsible for creating those relationships. But I agree, it's very different. And particularly when I see a list of names every Friday morning, but not everyone has the ability or desire to turn their video on, and I can't put faces to names. So it is, I think, something where there is a bit of a deficiency.
Yeah. Okay. We have a few minutes left, and I did want to actually share a few additional resources. So if you have any more questions, you can still think about those and put them into the chat. But I am just going to switch over now and share a few more resources that may be helpful to you if you want to dig a little deeper into some of these topics. What I'm showing on the screen right now are some resources that were developed specifically for experiential learning. So there was a working group on experiential learning, and the two that I've listed here are actually items that I developed, pulling from our experience with online learning and applying that to the experiential learning domain. So if you're interested in learning more about facilitating synchronous, such as what we're doing today, how to run effective webinars and synchronous events, and also overall strategies for the different types of activities and engagement strategies you can use with students. We have a couple of PowerPoints specifically on that. And of course, you can always tap the Center for Teaching Support and Innovation, who have any number of very specific guides. We had some questions on creating video, how to facilitate discussions online, and so on. And I would recommend that you tap their resources in general on course design and online teaching for tips and strategies around those topics. We have some session information there for our contact, rather, for ourselves, and a few additional resources from the experiential learning team that they would draw to your attention as well. So I'll leave that up, and I will just go back to the chat and see if there was anything else there, just any last questions before we wrap up. Vicky says she'd love to hear more from Shafiq about how we can encourage more humanities faculty members to offer undergraduate research opportunities. So Shafiq, do you want to have the last word on that question?
Sure, happy to do so. You know, I used to work both with FAS ROPs as well as UTM ROPs, and I would have loved to continue, but one of the challenges, I think, is what other faculty members feel, is that this is in addition to everything else that we do. And, you know, we do it pro bono and we do it because we love it. At the same time, I think this is such a valuable opportunity for students as well as for faculty members. Vicky, if you're able to lobby the senior administration to help us realize that this is part of what faculty members do, and you know, these are other ways of involving students and other ways of teaching. I'd say that really the next stage is to make the senior administration understand that these sorts of research experiences should be part of our teaching mandate and not just extras that we tack on. Because you know, your office as well as Sue's office, you guys are doing fantastic work. And I think more faculty members would be able to come on board if they could see as part of their mandate.
Great, thanks for that encouragement for advocacy there, Shafiq. We are just about at the top of the hour. These resources will be available to you after the session. The team will make those available. I would like to invite you to join me in thanking our presenters today. So we'll give them a round of virtual applause. Really interesting, and I really appreciated the mix of the STEM discipline and the humanities combined, and I think we can all glean, those of us in the sciences can learn from our colleagues in humanities and vice versa. So I think it's very inspiring that even though we're working remotely, there's still plenty of opportunity here. Thank you so much.